Eh, Ahí ya veo muchas caras que ya se están sumando. Bueno, espero que le haya ido bien en los workshops de la mañana, en la introducción. El invitado que viene es muy importante, muy para mí y yo creo que para varios, porque hace como un año cuando empezamos a pensar este workshop, justo un poquito antes de todas las revoluciones que hubieron en Chile, sentíamos nosotros en la facultad como el aire de cambio, por decirlo, y la necesidad como de cómo desde nuestro lugar en la universidad, abrir un espacio a esto que estaba bullente en las nuevas generaciones y que, bueno, terminó en todo lo que hemos visto. Teníamos como la necesidad de abrir nuevas formas de entender el aprendizaje, nuevas formas de conocimiento, nuevas formas de creatividad, pasando de lo individual a lo colectivo, abriendo la escucha a las sabidurías ancestrales, a la naturaleza, a otras partes de uno mismo también. Estaba emergiendo todo esto y creíamos que estábamos un poco nadando contra la corriente, y justo en ese momento, que ustedes ya saben que en Chile algo en el cuerpo social como que estalló un poco bastante, y justo vino el COVID, y con el COVID de pronto nos vimos todos encerrados, y con la sensación de que nos aislábamos. No sé cómo habrá sido para ustedes, pero para mí por lo menos ocurrió todo lo contrario, y entre otras cosas porque cuando estábamos buscando esta idea de lo co-creativo y del futuro, y de un futuro desde el bienestar ecosistémico, estábamos buscando a quiénes podíamos invitar, y encontramos un artículo de Otto Scharmer, que no lo conocíamos, la verdad, antes del año pasado, antes de que comenzara el COVID, y justo Otto estaba invitando a una actividad que iba a ser una activación global de intención y acción, se llamaba, Gaia. Y ahí algunos de nosotros de la facultad participamos y conectamos con muchísima gente de distintos lugares, muchos de los cuales están hoy día aquí. Y la verdad que ocurrió lo contrario, en realidad en lugar de aislarnos, nos conectamos. Siento que a muchos les debe haber pasado lo mismo, dentro de nuestros hogares y a través de esta pantalla, así como estamos ahora, en torno al fuego que hablábamos en la mañana, que igual se siente entre nosotros. Nos conectamos con todo el mundo, con mucha gente con la que resonábamos muchísimo, conocimos mucha gente que estaba tratando de generar cambios en la educación, en gobiernos, y bueno, y en estas conexiones nos dimos cuenta que todo esto partía de un misterioso lugar llamado el Presencing Institute, eh, y, de esta comunidad del Presencing Institute, todo venía de las ideas y las propuestas de Otto. Otto, para resumirles como no queremos hablar del pasado demasiado porque estamos aquí para hablar del presente, pero les voy a contar un poco qué no es Otto. Otto es profesor del MIT, cofundador del Presencing Institute, dirige el programa de innovación de Meet Ideas, ideas del Meet, y junto con el Presencing tienen un curso que es el ULab, que es una plataforma global que tiene más de 150.000 alumnos, yo creo hasta más o menos hoy en día, cerca de 200 países que están conectados entre gentes, personas, organizaciones, instituciones, incluso gobiernos que se han conectado a través de la teoría U y del ULab. Bueno, es parte de los departamentos de aprendizaje para la Agenda 2030 de las Naciones Unidas y muchísimas otras cosas que no voy a nombrar porque, como decía, no queremos hablar del pasado, sino que de este futuro que está emergiendo aquí y ahora entre nosotros. Así que les aprovecho de avisar que Otto va a hablar en inglés, por lo tanto, todos los que necesiten una traducción, yo desde ahora me voy a cambiar también a inglés, pueden ir abajo y seleccionar español, y van a escuchar la traducción de Otto. So, Otto, thank you very much for being here with us today. You have you have helped so many people and organizations to in this process of change that we're living today, globally. Here in Chile, we're in a special moment of transition. And so you have seen so many initiatives and actions around the world emerging in the last years. So I wondered, as a way of introducing you, if you could share with us, where do you think we are today, and what do you think is, what do you feel is emerging?
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you for the introduction. So can you hear me okay? So is the voice coming? Okay.
Perfect.
First of all, I would like to apologize for my poor language skills that requires me to give this talk in English, and apologies for those of you who may have an inconvenience by that. Thinking about your question, Pedro, I was actually flipping through the participants, and I saw, like, when I was listening, and I saw many of you in your student age right now. And I was thinking back of my own student days, and when I was actually, in college and also in high school, and it was an interesting period. I'm just aging myself. In addition to that, so it was in the late 70s, early 80s, where there was a lot of social unrest. So what you, Pedro, described, kind of the social movements for profound change that erupted in Chile and in other places before COVID, we had the same thing back then. And it was in part a really energizing feeling to be on the streets, to go onto these demonstrations. In our case, it was against nuclear power plants and against kind of the against new weapons that were about to installed, and so on and so forth. It was a strong feeling to be on the streets together, and yet most of the battles, what we fought for back then, were lost. And I always wondered, starting when I was a young person, is it going to stay that way, or is that ever going to change? And a few years later, when I was in Berlin and started my studies, back then I grew up in West Germany. And when you went from West Germany to Berlin, some of you may remember, in the 1980s, Europe was still divided by the Cold War system, which basically means there was a Western and an Eastern sphere. One was dominated by the Soviet Union. The other one was more by the US. And in between, there was a wall. And the wall went straight through Germany and straight through Berlin. So whenever, from my West German home, I grew up on a farm there. When I went to Berlin, you had to, and when in Berlin, you went from one part of the city to the other one, you had this massive wall and all these military there. And it looked like that this system was built forever. And so I had friends in East Berlin on the civil rights movement side, kind of people who tried to work for change there. And of course, I was connected with similar movements in West Berlin and West Germany. And it was very small connections. And it didn't look like we would make any progress at all. So that was in the early 1980s. And in 1989, I came back with an international student group that I was co-leading with a peace researcher. And we went first to West Berlin and West Germany, and then to East Berlin and East Germany, and also some places in Eastern Europe. And we were talking with the change makers on the ground back then. And about how they felt, what was going on, their hopes, their desperations, where they wanted to go. And none of them, so that was in early 1989, none of them were predicting what was going to happen, which is that by the end of the year, the Berlin Wall would have collapsed. And with the Berlin Wall, the divide that really put Europe into two separate spheres that had very little interaction with each other. And with that divide, eventually, it was seeding the collapse of the Soviet Union. So that lesson has been a big lesson in my life, because I was part of these conversations and I was part of these struggles. And then we hit a wall and we couldn't progress. And then people look back and said, look, all the other movements of resistance, they always, and in the end of the day, it's like ending with the Soviet tanks or with some other military and so on, will never succeed. That was the feeling I had as a young person, right? Many of us had. And today, not only the Berlin Wall is gone, not only the Soviet Union is gone, a whole system was collapsing there. Today, the movement that I helped to co-create back then, and that, then moved into a party, the Green Movement, moving into the Green Party. Now they're in certain places in government, in Germany already in government, and probably after the next federal election, they will be in the majority government. So as a majority partner in the government. So it is really interesting. It didn't happen overnight, but this change that we were fighting for back then, which is a new energy system, which is much more based on renewable energy, much more decentralized and so on and so forth. That's now going to happen, right? When you look into the industries today, this is exactly what's going to happen. This is what will be a part of the transformation of urban places that are already beginning to happen right now. And so it is really, so that's the place I wanted to start with, which is, so we live, so Pedro, that's a long way of responding to your answer. What do you see going on right now? I think what I feel going on is quite a similar moment than the 1989 moment in Berlin, where suddenly, without anyone predicting it, a wall is collapsing. Something that's looked as if this would continue for at least 100 years or several hundred years, suddenly was eroding and collapsing. And a new order began to take shape. And I think moving into 2020 and, maybe in your case, 2019, 2020, 2021 is moving us into a new decade where we on this planet will see more changes, more transformation, more disruption than we have ever seen in any decade before. And it has to do, so when I say that, I'm not saying that because, I see into the future in a way other people cannot, right? I'm just counting together 2 and 2, so all the writing is at the wall, just as you could have predicted the collapse of the Berlin Wall in hindsight, if you knew what was going to happen. You can now see the disruption happening in at least 4 or 5 key spaces that are all relating to what you all are working on in your studies and maybe later in your professional careers. It has to do with reinventing energy and transportation, right? Which will reshape how we think about cities. It has to do with reinventing farm and food, right? The localization of the farm and food cycle. It has to do with the reinvention of health and well-being, really moving from just fighting the symptoms of sickness towards strengthening the sources of health. And it also has to do with reimagining and reshaping spaces of learning, right? Kind of from more traditional head-centric learning and communication spaces to ones that are kind of more whole person, whole system, as you're doing it, and as you are prototyping it in such an interesting way throughout this week. And then, of course, there will be other governance and finance. There's kind of other things that are also being disrupted right now, disrupted in part by digital technologies, but also disrupted by massive environmental problems and massive problems of inequality and exclusion, which now everyone is aware of and which set the stage for a major rethinking of how we want to live, imagine, and live and enact our future, not only individually, but also collectively. So that's what I see at the current moment. And when you think about 1989, so what was collapsing there? The Berlin Wall was really a wall that separated two different systems, capitalism, socialism, right? And so that was the situation back then. When you think about 2020, right, when you think about COVID, what is the wall that's collapsing now? I would say today, the wall that's collapsing is a wall that's separating me as an individual from the system. So it's system itself, it's kind of that boundary that is so interesting right now. And what it means is that we, as change makers, we, just as as a young person, right, I was participating in that, and then I got frustrated and often discouraged, really, by the lack of progress. But now, in hindsight, and even as I told you, so when months before the Berlin Wall came down, talking with the change makers on the ground in East Berlin who made it happen, they had no idea how profound their impact was on the system back then. So it should remind us that now, at the beginning of this decade, where everyone knows profound changes, profound transformations are happening, you are in the perfect position because you are not bought into the old system. So you kind of can look at the whole situation with fresh eyes and really be part of the future, imagine the future, and be part of something that's emerging rather than spending all your energy on holding on to the old stuff that is going to hit the wall anyway, just as the old Soviet system was about hitting the wall back then. So that's a little bit how I would look at the current situation. And maybe just before we move into a little bit into a conversation where you will be invited to really look at, attend to what is it that you're actually seeing in your context, what is ending and hitting the wall, and where is it that you see a possibility that you may have some agency on, some future possibility that maybe you can bring into reality or you think might be interesting, might be somehow related to your own path forward. Which is, of course, what is the main subject of interest here, right? And before doing that, let me just share a little bit of maybe like my own background and some of the work that I and my colleagues, like Arana Ayashi, I think she's also part of the faculty here this week, and other colleagues of the Presencing Institute are currently engaged in. So just allow me to share the screen real quick. So this is basically an image of the current situation that I described, right? So I said, so what is the current situation? It's characterized by what? By disruption, right? And what does disruption mean? It means we're here on one side, right? So current reality, emerging future is going to look different, right? So the future will be different from the past. That's what disruption says. And the big problem is not only what is actually happening here, like sensing into that, but also how do we move actually from here to here? So how do we create these wings, right, under our feet, kind of that allow us to really move from here to there? And what I would say, kind of from a presencing perspective, or from the perspective from our method that Arana and I and other colleagues co-developed, what it takes is a journey. A journey that's both an outer journey, right, going to the edges of the system, really looking at kind of into communities where the current system is failing and so on, and an inner journey where kind of we, develop these deeper capacities there that I'm going to talk about it a little more. And so what this kind of thing method is called, and that was really the reason why I, many years back, 25 years back, went finally from Europe or from Germany to the US, to Boston, to MIT. I want to study systems thinking. And what is really systems thinking? Well, you have seen this probably many times, right? It's the iceberg model, right? So there's symptoms visible at the top, right? But then there is an under the water structure of the iceberg that is also important. So, and that's kind of indicated with these words here. And so there's structures, there's mental paradigms of thought, right? So in your subject area, right, you deal with different paradigms of thought. So that's an even deeper level. And what is this source? Source of what? Source of creativity, source of really connecting with something that you could create, that you could bring into reality. So here, like four principles, or kind of four summarizing sentences of this approach that I refer to not just as systems thinking, but as awareness-based systems change. And why awareness-based systems change? Because instead of source, I could have also said awareness or consciousness. Okay, so it's kind of number one. So you cannot understand a system unless you change it. So and that's maybe something you will find in your studies, right? So unless you engage people, unless you engage with real people and real communities, you actually don't know much about a system. Number two, you cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. So what that means is, if you want to change a system, you need to address all four of these things here. It's not enough just tinkering at the top. If that's true, so if you don't like this word, consciousness, just take mindset, right? Because if you don't change the mindset, the same people will create the same problems, right? So you need to mindset is how we see, how we perceive, how we frame, how we think. So the real question then is how? How do we do that? You can't transform consciousness unless you make a system see and sense itself. Unless you look into the mirror, not only as an individual, but also as a collective. Unless when we see the system out there, we realize this is what we enact out there has to do with the way we perceive, the way we frame. And lastly, you can't regenerate systems, right? And so many people talk about sustainability, but the much better word is this: regenerate, because sustaining, well, we already destroyed so much. We need to regenerate, really, the ecosystems that we are dealing with. So you can't regenerative systems unless you sense and actualize the future as it emerges. And that's really, so my professional work really is about leadership, right? And what is the essence of leadership? It's exactly this. So it's leadership is the capacity of a system to sense and shape the future, or you could also say to sense and actualize the future. And of course, as I don't need to explain to you, that's the essence of creativity. Kind of that's the essence of what you do whenever you design or you create anything, really, whether it's in arts or in architecture, in design. That's really also the core of our economy, because at the end, our economy is, accessing this deeper creative force and turning it, putting it into the service of human needs, kind of where we need, where we serve human needs in society. So the question is how, right? How do we do that? This sensing and actualizing the future. And that's the question for all of us here. So what I learned is two things. One, you need a process, obviously, right? A process that moves you beyond downloading, which is same old, applying your old patterns of action and thought, right? By observe, stillness, or retreat and reflect, allow the inner knowing to emerge, and then act in an instant, right? Explore the future by rapid cycle prototyping. Well, so all of you who do design thinking and so on, so this is very familiar, right? You also know this one here, kind of the empathic user design, all these things. But maybe this is a little new to kind of to do that in a more intentional way. So that's the one thing we learned. You need a process, right, that somehow is deepening your capacity to connect on all three of these dimensions. But the other thing that we learned is to do that well, you really have to, as a designer, as a change maker, as somebody who wants to bring something new into reality, you have to do some inner work, some inner leadership work that I refer to with this, right? Open mind, open heart, open will. You have to tune these instruments of inner knowing, aka curiosity, compassion, courage. And so one of the people that I interviewed summarized his own experience as a change maker with this line: the success of an intervention, of what I do, depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So the success of what I do as a change maker depends on the inner place from that I operate. And what is this inner place? It's really kind of tuning these three instruments. I think that's often overlooked. That's kind of the invisible dimension of mediocre and great leader. What differentiates mediocre and great leadership, but also whether or not you can really connect with a situation that you are dealing with. What do I mean really with open mind, right? What is that as a capability? It's really to see with fresh eyes, right? By suspending your old habits of thought. Open heart really means to empathize, to look at a problem through the eyes, not your own silo perspective, but through the eyes of your partners, of your stakeholders. And open will really is the capacity to do this, letting go of the old and letting come of the new. So that's what I would say is really at the heart of a lot of change today. And when you look into reality, I mean, it hasn't been really that different here in the US than what you have been probably experiencing. What do we see? Pretty much the opposite. Pretty much exactly the opposite of everything I just shared with you, which is not opening the mind, heart, will, but a freeze reaction of the mind, heart, will, aka amplifying doubt, hate, and fear. So I could now go through this whole cycle, right, of denial, desensing in our filter bubbles, disconnecting to our future potential, blaming, destruction, self-destruction. But I don't have to, because you already know that from your own contemplation of what's going on in many places today. So in many places today, we see some of this down here, but we also see a fair doses of what's going on up here, right? So we are right in between. I would say on a good day, I'm operating down here. And when I have a bad day, so sometimes without me actually intending to, I can reenact some of these patterns, okay? So what's the real problem today as change makers? We need to deal with these inner enemies, right? Doubt, hate, or kind of emotional disconnect and fear. Why? Because they disable us to connect with our true source of creativity. And, so in social science language, you can call that, you don't have to, post-truth, post-democracy, post-humanity, by which I mean disinformation and doubt architectures of separation, right? Post-democracy, kind of everyone stuck in their own filter bubble, right? Governed by Facebook and so forth. And post-humanity, right? So that which has to do with technology and so on. So that's kind of the problem surface we all face at the beginning of this decade of transformation. But what does it take for us to transform these conditions? And I would say it takes three things and three practical capacities that we need to deepen. Deepening science really has everything to do with listening, right? Can you listen with humility, right? Can you really listen to people that you disagree with, for example, right? So that's, can we listen to people who we are usually not listening to? Can I really not only on a head level listen to people, but connect to the deeper resonance, kind of connect to what they feel? The second level is, instead of post-democracy, right? So is deepening democracy, building architectures of connection, right? Rather than, amplifying architectures of separation. And the personal capacity there, so I as a change maker, so this is here a good question you can ask yourself. Can you sense the system from the edges? Who are actually the people and voices you or kind of your organization usually is not paying attention to, right? I mean, think about, for example, here in the US or in Canada, I'm just coming off a call. There is really a reckoning with systemic racism and against people of color, and also in particular against indigenous people, right? It's a big awakening because it's a blind spot in most white people, right? And I'm not excluding myself here. I really have learned so much in that, and it's happening in all institutions right now. The same is also true for the UN. So I think that is part of the transformation. Can you sense the system from all the different partners involved, and not just the few of them you usually do? And then the last one here is deepening co-creativity. So can we activate action confidence? And what I mean by that is this, right? Can you actually sense and realize the future? And so the interesting word is not realize here, but sensing, because I believe the future, and I have seen many innovators and many creative people share that the future starts here in our heart. It's first is an ambivalent feeling that you have, maybe an uneasiness with how things are, right? Or just a frustration with now how things are stuck. And then can you sense and actualize the future means where is it actually in your own experience that you feel the presence of a possibility that maybe is connected with your own path forward? So that's really something to pay attention to. And if it's for some of us, it may be very concrete, right? This is what I'm going to do, and I'm just going after that. For others, it's just kind of, I just have a vague feeling, right? I don't know, but pay attention to that, because that's part of that, right? So, and investigate that feeling. For example, in the conversation we are going to have in a few minutes, right? So, because if you pay attention to that, you begin to listen to the voice that's coming from within, from your heart. And that's ultimately, for anyone who is doing something creative, the ultimate voice, right? You need to learn to pay attention to your heart. And you need to, that's not the only voice, but it's a very, very important voice. So that's basically, when I talk about systems change, is moving people from this kind of mindset. I'm here on one side of the telescope. The reality I see, the system I see, is on the other side, to this kind of view, right? Which is, I'm part of the system that I'm observing and that I'm complaining about, right? That I want to change. And I can therefore use the change of my own behavior kind of as a leverage point. So there are like many examples we could go through, but we don't have to. This is a method that Arana is going to lead you into, social presencing theater. And what we learned is really, if you really want to go through this mindset shift, right, towards more co-creativity, you need to learn with your whole body, right? So, and that's kind of what you need to, the body that we have as individuals, our whole body, not only the head, but head, heart, and hand, and also the whole group, right? It needs to be a collective process, as many of you, of course, already know. So we are doing this work not only like in small groups, but also with big institutions like the UN. And eventually, kind of what we try to do, I think where we also really align with what Pedro and others are doing here together with you, is that we try to do this, right? So we as a generation, right, alive on planet Earth right now, planetary healing, that's necessary, and also civilizational renewal, right, around social justice. So that's kind of what needs to happen. And what is the only way of doing that? So that's basically summarizing what I try to say. Okay, if we want to do this, right, so that's my summary here, then the only way of doing that is activate co-creative social fields, like you see here, and which is what Arana will lead you into. In other words, we need to move from transactional or from toxic relationships to relationships that are more co-creative, right? That's the challenge we face, not only with our friends, but also with people that we may disagree with, right? That makes it challenging, but also interesting. And the only way of doing that, in my view, is if you have a support structure. So that's what we call School for Transformation here. And that's, for you, it's kind of the faculty, right, for arts, architecture, and design right now. But in the future, you need to build something for yourself. You need a support structure, and that's really where I want to end. And for me personally, is support structure, and what I have seen many people using, many innovators using, is a personal practice. You pick a reflection practice, that you have a few friends, kind of you have one or two or several people that you have real honest conversations with, where you can support each other, like a deeper listening space. And then lastly, follow your heart, right? So the only way to do your best work is to do what you love. And I think that's at the end of the day, listening to your heart and taking that voice, what your heart is actually saying to you, is of ultimate importance for anyone who tries to create something new and anyone who tries to access the deeper levels of our own creativity. So that's a little bit from my own experience. And with that, I turn it over to Pedro.
Thank you very much, Otto. I think what you have said, we should come with us during all this week and our lives as well. This listening to our hearts, believing in the voice of what comes, listening to the walls that maybe we see in ourselves, we feel in society. And well, I want to pass it to Vivi, so we can do a dynamic all together after the words.
Muchas gracias, Otto. Honro también a Araguana, que está aquí hoy día con nosotros, y queremos hacer espacio para lo que nos invitaba Otto, espacio desde el cuerpo, a sentir. Nos conectamos, sentimos los pies en la tierra, respiramos profundo por la nariz, botamos el aire por la boca y damos espacio. Damos espacio para escuchar nuestro corazón. ¿Qué vamos sintiendo? Todas esas ideas que aparecieron. ¿Qué nos dice nuestro cuerpo? Siento mi espalda fuerte, siento mi corazón disponible, suave. ¿Qué es eso que están haciendo para mí? ¿Dónde veo ese llamado? En mi vida, en mi trabajo. Inhalo grande, profundo. Sentimos esta tierra en la que estamos todos juntos. ¿Cuáles son esas chispas de futuro con las que me puedo comprometer? Muchas gracias. Los invitamos ahora entonces a compartir en grupos. Y vamos a compartir, cada uno va a compartir su propia mirada. Y luego nos abrimos a una conversación entre todos. Entonces escuchamos desde ese lugar. Estoy aquí para que tú seas el mejor tú posible. Felipe nos va a invitar a unas piezas a compartir. ¿Dónde veo ese futuro? En mi vida, en mi trabajo. ¿Dónde están esas posibilidades? Vamos a tener 15 minutos para compartir.
Ya, se abren las salas.
Súper. Ya vamos volviendo. Y queremos escucharlos, queremos saber qué apareció. Y como estamos un poco contra el tiempo y además queremos alcanzar a conversar un poco con Otto, queremos alcanzar a hacer muchas cosas. Entonces, lo primero es invitarlos a que compartan en el chat. ¿Qué es eso que están haciendo para mí? ¿Qué es eso que se me apareció? Para mí o en la conversación con los otros. Entonces compartimos en el chat. ¿Qué es eso que apareció? Queremos escuchar las voces de los alumnos. Si alguno quisiera compartir también puede levantar su mano y contarnos. Si alguien me puede ayudar con las manitos azules, si es que hay alguna manito levantada. ¿A qué nos está llamando ese futuro? Simone dice que quedamos cortos en los tiempos, suele pasarnos en estas rooms. Marcelo, ¿quisieras compartirnos algo? Marcelo, que estás con la mano levantada.
Mira, básicamente lo que a mí me pareció muy interesante toda la exposición y frente a la pregunta que hacen, creo que una digamos, de las cosas de la pega que uno pudiera intentar poner es soltar lo viejo que se dijo en algún momento. Y eso requiere un trabajo interior grande, requiere un esfuerzo, requiere una pega, ¿sí? Espero que el mundo cambie, que mi entorno cambie. Sin embargo, a lo único que creo yo uno puede aspirar es al cambio interior. Y lo uno un poco con las ideas que se pusieron, que era curiosidad, pasión, valentía, que es una curiosidad que debo, digamos, intentar explotar dentro de mí, una pasión que debo intentar encender un fuego que depende de mí, y un coraje y una valentía que requiere del trabajo permanente de uno cada vez que me levanto en la mañana. Creo que estamos viendo un tiempo, un tiempo desafiante en eso, porque queremos que todo venga desde afuera, está todo muy rápido, muy dado de afuera, de la rapidez que estamos viviendo en estos tiempos, Y la verdad que para encontrar ese espacio interior debo tener una calma interna. Y eso me lo tengo que pedir a mí mismo. Chuta, eso quería partir por compartir, eso quería compartir
Súper,
en este momento.
muchas gracias Marcelo, ese ritmo, ¿no? Ese espacio, dejar espacio para lo que
Sí.
viene.
Y solamente para terminar, y para
Y
abrir
para
ese
cuidar el
espacio,
tiempo, dale
perdón,
Marcelo, dale
no que eso,
Marcelo.
es que solamente abrir, o sea, abrir ese espacio, claro, es volviendo a uno mismo. No, eso, gracias.
A ti.
Oye, Vivi, aquí los estudiantes, las notas de Miguel, rescato una de Ricardo, estudiante, que dice, ¿cómo serían los cambios, cierto, fuera parte de la enseñanza escolar? Hay harto trabajo, dice. Regenerar desde los márgenes, desde las acciones cotidianas, complicidad con la naturaleza, volver a las raíces, dice Claudia.
Wow. Miguel, que estás con la mano levantada.
Yo quedé muy impactado, bueno, con varias cosas, pero sobre todo con la siguiente, que en el fondo es una invitación a todos a algo que sí está a la mano, no es una tarea tan grande, lo es, pero depende de nosotros, que es al recogerse, ver algo eh, con lo que uno puede diseñar el momento siguiente. Digamos que estamos invitados, lo que ofrece Otto, lo que nos ofrece a todos es que estamos invitados a diseñar el momento siguiente. Y eso requiere de una enorme sensibilidad, una, un enorme cuidado con lo que emerge en uno y una gigante voluntad y el valor de ponerlo en marcha. No lo había visto así. Y requiere una enorme creatividad. Nos invita a ser creativos, pero de ese modo, de construcción del momento siguiente. Y así cada paso.
Voy a leer algunos de los que siguen aquí, de los que han escrito. Generar espacios desde mi condición interior para sintonizar con profunda escucha que permite la expresión de creatividad con soporte de una comunidad de práctica. Crear espacios de libertad justamente en la enseñanza. Incrementar gradualmente el tiempo diario hacia aquellas acciones en las que vibramos, conectamos y nos apasionamos. Permitirse sentir y practicar la introspección, conocernos a nosotros mismos y así comprender también a los demás. Un llamado a descubrir esa voz dentro de cada uno de nosotros.
Pedro, yo quisiera comentar también, hacer un comentario. En mí resonó mucho estos tres pilares que también comentaba Marcelo, que es la curiosidad, que se vincula con el generar la pregunta, con el pensar, como con una actividad espiritual que va más allá, la compasión, que es en el fondo el sentir, el vincularse con el corazón, en el fondo con lo que uno hace, con todo lo que uno hace, y la valentía en el actuar, que es en el fondo el transformar, el crear. Creo que esos tres pilares los vinculé también mucho con la pedagogía Waldorf, que son como los tres pilares fundamentales que buscan reforzar todo lo que es la autoestima, el autoconocimiento, para llegar a esta unión que se hablaba con la naturaleza, con el otro, en el fondo estar como primero bien centrado en uno mismo, tener ese espacio para poder escuchar al otro, requiere como esas cuatro pilares que creo que son que es fundamental apoyarlos desde un comienzo. Y luego ya la formación universitaria es lo que genera también como ese otro espacio al compartir con el otro de una manera, como con una distancia, teniendo una postura, por así decirlo. Eso. Gracias.
Gracias, Daniela. Aquí la Claudia también comparte de su grupito, de los grupos en que estuvo, de una alumna que dijo, estudiante que puso: ¿por qué las personas se desligan de lo que quieren al pasar el tiempo? A mí me pasaba eso, ¿no? Que uno no quería ser grande porque los veía tan a los adultos tan desconectados de sí mismos. Estamos pasando tantos, Rosa dice, estamos pasando tantos cambios y en vez de estar aprendiendo de nosotros siempre nos dejamos ser y nos ponemos muros uno tras otro. Y debemos dejarnos fluir y florecer a nuestro tiempo y conocer primero nosotros para tener claro quiénes somos. El mundo adulto es muy incoherente, dicen aquí. Entre el mundo de los pintores siempre se dice que todas las pintoras son un autorretrato, lo cual inevitablemente nosotros en el mundo creativo estamos siempre lidiando con nosotros mismos, aunque no queramos enfrentarnos a eso. Bueno, Otto, no sé, Vivi, Otto no lo veo por ahí. Se debe haber tomado muy... Ahí está Otto. No sé si alguien más quiere compartir.
A mí me gustaría agregar algo cortito que apareció en mi grupo, que hablamos como del espacio y la intimidad, como lo importante de... Estuvo muy emotivo en mi grupito, y como por la sencilla razón de que una de las personas abrió su corazón, y entonces eso permitió que todos los demás que estábamos ahí hiciéramos el mismo ejercicio. Así que muchas gracias, ya saben, a mis compañeritos de grupo, muchas gracias.
Eso es bien importante lo que dice Viviana. Por lo general se provoca una cadena de consecuencias cuando alguien comienza, alguien inicia y existe más probabilidad de que surja lo que se desea. Y ese cambio, lógicamente, podemos ser nosotros, cada uno de nosotros.
Tal vez uno de los primeros muros que uno se encuentra es el muro que hemos construido en torno a nuestro propio corazón y nuestros propios sentimientos. Me contaban ahí por interno que también en muchos grupos había mucha emoción y hay poco espacio en nuestra sociedad y en el sistema educacional para hacer un espacio para el sentimiento también, y todo lo que está ahí muy atrapado en general por una sociedad que rechaza bastante el mundo de los sentimientos en pos solamente de la razón. Sí, para el miércoles vamos a tener a Araguana. Supongo que una de las preguntas importantes tiene que ver con eso, como cómo abrir un espacio para sentir y permitir que emerja este futuro que quiere emerger desde nuestro corazón, como dice Otto. Otto, sí,
Pedro, sí.
Sí, por supuesto.
Claro, a mí lo que me pasó un poco que es interesante como esto parar y mirarnos como estamos efectivamente, porque como sociedad somos una sociedad súper egoísta en el sentido de que si tú te paras con alguien, te encuentras con alguien en la calle y le preguntas ¿cómo estás? Bien, te dice, y sigue. Pues si tú le dices, han hecho el ejercicio de decirle mal, mal, o muy mal, y te dice, ¡ah, qué rico! Y sigue de largo. Entonces es como, porque en el fondo nadie te está preguntando de verdad ¿cómo estás? Y eso es bien interesante, como en otras sociedades sí se dan esos espacios. Y a mí me agrada mucho que esos espacios se den en los ambientes académicos, porque creo que ayudan justamente a estos pilares, a construir estos espacios de confianza, donde si no existen los espacios de confianza no se puede desarrollar la creatividad. Y el compromiso. Y el trabajo colaborativo.
Gracias,
Pedro.
Paula. Otto, I don't know if you would like to share something before. I know you have. I don't want to keep taking up your time. I don't know if you want to reflect on something.
Well, just very briefly, it was wonderful to listening to you, and I could really resonate with what you all described, and maybe in reflection on that, what I heard, three really quick points. Kind of the first one is summarizing basically what I said in my talk. And the first one is, so if in your context happens to be a wall, right, that looks very solid and almost unsurmountable, right? And it has been there forever, right? You ask your parents, you ask your friends, and so on. It has been there forever. It was never different. That's true for the past. And what does it mean for tomorrow? And the answer is nothing. It means nothing. Just because it was like that for ages, what does it mean for tomorrow? Nothing. Because every wall is continuing for a while until it no longer does. And then it's collapsing. And we'll see, this generation, you guys, and we all will see a lot of collapse going forward, right? And some of that collapse means letting go, and it means opportunity, because it gives way for a new way of operating. Well, that's the first thing. So what does all this experience, which is so important, mean for tomorrow? Nothing, because the human spirit works in ways, transformation in society works in ways that you cannot predict. It's a different mechanism. And that's what, to connect with that mechanism, you need to activate your heart. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this kind of transformation that is ahead of us will not be easy, and no one can do it alone, right? The most important thing you need is a few friends, right? Because only then, you don't need many. You just need 2, 3, 4 people. 5 people can change the world. So use this week, use this year, use your time at the faculty, at the department, to find these people you want to connect with, people who can listen to you in a profound way. Profound listening means not only listening what you say, but listening in terms of what you said a moment ago, but listening to you in terms of who are you tomorrow? What is your highest future possibility? And if we have 2 or 3 friends like that, if we get together once in a while, that's an enormous resource of support, because the changes that are ahead of us, no one can do alone. So form your own little circle, right? And that can be just one other person, right? Or maybe it's 4 or 5, a little circle, right? But that's my second point. And the last one is, has to do with places. So ask yourself, in the context that you're in, where are the places of most potential? So where are places that maybe you don't know that well, and that if you go there, could teach you something, could connect? So the place that could be another person, another human being, it could be a community, it could be another city, another village. I don't know what it is, right? Could be another project, kind of. So where are the places of most potential, where something that you want to make happen is already existing in some form, right? Or has a piece of that. And then connect to these people. Because the new does not start here, that you analyze everything to death. The new starts with connecting to the right people and then having a conversation. And that is generating opportunities and ideas. That's why, the question, how do I move out of my own bubble, particularly the digital bubble, and connect to the people that could really help me to take the next step? That's an important question to ask. And it's, yes, under COVID, it's all difficult, but it's not impossible. You can also have these connections, some of these connections digitally. And then once COVID will fade away sooner or later, these new opportunities for in-person connection will open up. Use it, because that's where the possibility is.
Thank you very much, Otto. I think you gave us a lot of tips, of attention points for this journey, for every one of the workshops, some lights of how can we move forward. And I want to thank you very much for being here, part of this journey, part of this dream. And so we are on time. Maybe I would like to ask you one, if you would give us or tell us one thing that you think it's important to move towards a new education, a main shift for the emerging education. What do you think that shift, that change would be?
Well, one shift is no longer being organized by disciplines. So I think you have the perfect combination of disciplines, architecture, art, and design. And what is it you can do together to really be in service of where a lot of the innovation is going to happen, which is in urban places and also in villages, right? So place-based innovation, and particularly kind of the rethinking and reimagining how we live and work together in urban places and rural places, that's really the frontier, because the future shows up first on a small scale and later it grows to a larger scale. So how could you use the place where you are and the strength that you already have and the connections that you already have really as a gateway into the future? I think that's where you are in a really great position to be a leader and a pioneer and to do something that will inspire others to do similar things. And so I'm here at MIT. So MIT is not a bad place. Don't get me wrong. I'm not complaining really real big, but I wished we would have a week like the one you have, right? So I think kind of in that way, kind of you're already more innovative than much of the stuff going on here. But, you know, moving across disciplines and really the way I think about between university and society is like a breathing organism, right? Innovation happens when the university, if the university is a living system, or let's say your department, think of it as a living system or a being. And breathing means you can't isolate yourself from society and from the community and from the urban places you are connected with. You need to lean into that. You need to empathize with that. And then you need to bring it back on campus and design new solutions. And so it's kind of breathing in, breathing out as a learning space that knows both of these modalities, being connected on the ground, in the streets, kind of in the communities, but then also returning back on campus and reflecting and renewing your methods and tools and having safe practice fields to try out new things. I think that's where a lot of innovation is happening. It's also here at MIT. The most interesting stuff happens in connection with society, in connections with innovation and enterprises. So I think you have a wonderful opportunity there to be a real pioneer.
Thank you very much, Otto. There's a lot of commentaries here. Like we will have to be responsible of what is happening here. All the synergy that is being generated by this activity cannot be contained in a week, they said. It seems like a new form of meeting and a new emerging university. Anyway, there's a lot of commentaries, Otto. I know we're past the time, so I just want to thank you very much. I don't know if you wanna close.
Yeah, thank you. So the new university is already here. It's you. It's all of you and it's all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Otto.
Gracias, Otto. Gracias a todos.
Bueno, estamos en el tiempo. Muchas gracias a todos por participar. Yo sé que hay muchas preguntas, muchas ganas de compartir. Escriban todo porque esto va a quedar guardado además y guardémonos el momento también para el momento en que vamos a conversar el jueves. Antes de que nos vayamos, quiero compartirles un poco dónde estamos. Estamos aquí acabamos de terminar, ¿cierto?, la charla de Otto. pueden, algunos workshops van a seguir trabajando en la tarde, algunos van a trabajar mañana en la mañana, algunos workshops recién van a empezar mañana después de almuerzo. La próxima vez, cada uno, cuando sea que se coordinó con sus colaboradores y invitados, se juntan para los workshops, y la próxima vez que nos vemos nosotros, todos juntos, en el plenario, en este mismo link, es el miércoles a las 12 en punto, ojalá 5 para las 12, que vamos a tener a Araguana, con quien vamos a compartir también una pequeña charla, pero principalmente una práctica, todos juntos en torno a cómo bienvenir la incertidumbre. Este estado en que estamos de incertidumbre, de disrupción, cómo podemos, desde la conexión con nuestro cuerpo, hacer un espacio para bienvenir lo que emerge y un espacio para la creatividad. Así que, Vivi, ¿quieres algún comentario final?
No, solo celebrar en el momento que ya estamos avanzados en el camino, y agradecer y celebrar. Entonces quizás podríamos abrir todos nuestros micrófonos y despedirnos y dar las gracias, que continúa este viaje, si es que les parece. Incluso los que no tienen cámara.
Pueden abrir micrófonos.
Chao.
Pueden abrir micrófonos. Chao, que les vaya bien. Gracias.
Bonita tarde.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias por todo.
Chao, chao.
Chao,
Chao.
Gracias. Nos vemos. Cuídense, cuídense.
Chao, gracias.
Chao, chao.
Muchas gracias.
Chao.
Qué pena irse.